Hi guys, and welcome back. I hope you're keeping safe and everything is going well. I hope you're using these resources and annotating your novels in as good a fashion as you can. Please, if you have any questions about the work so far, please message me, stay in touch. Okay. So today we're going to work on chapter 4. So just to reiterate, here are the numbers again. Please make a note of them. They're a good breakdown of all the things that happen in this chapter. They work as a really nice summary. And again, all of these sections could be used for extracts in GCSE preparation. So let's move on. Today, this chapter is going to be quite a long video. You might want to watch this one in sections. This is 11 pages, whereas the other chapters have been more like 6 or 7 pages. So this might take 2 or 3 sessions to get through. So, chapter 4. In this chapter, we're going to be introduced to the character of Thaddeus Sholto. We're going to be given some descriptions of him physically. We're going to be given some descriptions of his actions and his feelings. Possibly most importantly, though, we're going to see a lot of Thaddeus Sholto's backstory. We're going to see things about his father. We're going to see things about what his father did. And in doing this, Conan Doyle creates lots of different narrative perspectives in this chapter. So the whole novel is written from the perspective of Watson. So when I use the word narrative perspective, I mean that the book is written from the narrative perspective of Watson. Now in this chapter, as other characters are introduced, as the plot develops, as the mystery unfolds, we will be given other narrative perspectives. So this chapter, for example, starts off with Watson's narrative perspective, then moves on to Thaddeus Sholto's narrative perspective, i.e. the story is told, like he is telling the story, and then we move on to Thaddeus Sholto's father's narrative perspective. So he then is telling the story through Thaddeus Sholto, through Watson, who is writing this book. Now, in terms of literature, we would call this the Chinese box structure, where one narrative unfolds into a different narrative, which unfolds into a different narrative, and then everything is packed away nicely at the end. So we will see, and we will note this as we go through the chapter, that we start with Watson, move to Thaddeus, move to Major Sholto, then back to Thaddeus, then back to Watson. Now, all of this, I've talked about unreliable narrators, and maybe in this instance, we could consider Watson somewhat unreliable because Thaddeus Sholto relates his father's story, and so the stories have gone through 3 different filters before Watson is writing this on the page. So maybe here we're going to see some things that are not true, but we'll definitely get to those as we go. Alongside that, we're going to be seeing issues around class, issues around colonialism and empire are explored within this chapter. We will be given more of those dualities of character. We talked about duality of character in the last chapter, the light dark imagery around Holmes and Mary Morstan, maybe representing 2 sides of their character. We're going to see more of that in this chapter now. So we're going to see some duality of character within Thaddeus Sholto, within Major Sholto. But again, we'll get to those when we get there. So I'm just going to do exactly the same as I've done before. I'm going to read through the pages, then I'm going to go through some of my annotation, some of the big ideas around the chapter, and ask you any questions that I may have set within this annotation. Okay. So let's begin. Remembering at this point in the story that Holmes and Watson and Mary Morstan have arrived at this mysterious gentleman's house, the person who sent the note, who sent the pearls, all of that. So they've gone through this dark, forbidding neighbourhood out on the outskirts of London, and they've arrived at this house. So we followed the Indian down a sordid and common passage, ill-lit and worse furnished, until he came to a door upon the right, which he threw open. A blaze of yellow light streamed out upon us, and in the centre of the glare there stood a small man with a very high head, a bristle of red hair all round the fringe of it, and a bold shining scalp which shot out from among it like a mountain peak from fir trees. He writhed his hands together as he stood, and his features were in a perpetual jerk, now smiling, now scowling, but never for an instant in repose. Nature had given him a pendulous lip and a too visible line of yellow and irregular teeth, which he strove feebly to conceal by constantly passing his hand over the lower part of his face. In spite of his obtrusive boldness, he gave the impression of youth. In point of fact, he had just turned his 30th year. "Your servant, Miss Morstan," he kept repeating in a thin, high voice. "Your servant, gentlemen. Pray, step into my little sanctum. A small place, miss, but furnished to my own liking. An oasis of art in the howling desert of South London." We were all astonished by the appearance of the apartment into which he invited us. In that sorry house, it looked as out of place as a diamond of the first water in a setting of brass. The richest and glossiest of curtains. Okay, so we'll stop there. So we start off with Watson describing the house when he still thinks this is in a poor neighbourhood. He talks about the corridor leading to the main room as being sordid and common, the fact that it was ill-lit and worse furnished. So this shows that he has this opinion that the lower classes are maybe immoral or dishonourable, the sordid decoration, that he puts furnishings and the appearance of something over whoever might be living in there. He prejudges. But then we are given this blaze of yellow light, and I definitely think that the symbolism behind the yellow here talks about wealth. Last chapter we talked about all the different things that yellow could mean, but here we're going from a very poor corridor into a very rich, a lavish room. So I think the yellow light here is indicating that within this room is something of value, and that could be Thaddeus Sholto's possessions, but at the same time it could be the information about Mary Morstan's father, and that leading on to them getting hold of some treasure. So we're then given a description of Thaddeus Sholto, a small man with a very high head, red hair, bold shining scalp which shot out of it from among it like mountain peak from fir trees. And I want us to focus on this first. So we have this metaphor that his shining scalp shot out from his forehead, that it was out of place, his shining scalp. This talks about his head maybe being a little bit deformed, that his scalp is a prominent feature. One of the first things that you notice is the boldness of this man. But then we have this simile, like a mountain peak from fir trees. So this maybe foreshadows that Thaddeus Sholto has lofty ideas. He is interested in higher ideals, ideas around culture and art and science. He's a refined gentleman. So this kind of predicts some of his characteristics as well as showing how he looked. He writhed his hands. His features were in a perpetual jerk. So he's not comfortable. He's worried. Something is happening here that is making Thaddeus Sholto a little bit scared. And here we have a little duality, smiling, scowling. So 1 minute happy, 1 minute nervous. I think that this talks of the duality that must be within him. Because Thaddeus wants to do the right thing. He wants to give Mary this money. So on one hand, he is happy that she's there. But on the other hand, he's concerned for his brother Bartholomew. He's worried the police are going to get involved. He's worried that he's going to get in trouble because of this. So there is that duality within his character. More things about his, I would say, ugly, in inverted commas, that he is not a very attractive man. His pendulous lip, his line of yellow and irregular teeth, all of this, and the fact that he gave the impression of youth. So if this was an old person, then maybe some of these features, the boldness, the lip, the teeth, maybe some of those features would be understandable if he was an older person, but he's not. He's a young person. So this is a juxtaposition that makes us feel a little bit of sympathy with Thaddeus Sholto for his appearance. Then we get a little bit of Thaddeus Sholto talking. So his thin, high voice. This talks about weakness, the need for protection, maybe even effeminate. That he's a little bit like a woman, a little bit. Now here, a nice word, sanctum. I've included this idea. This is idiosyncratic language. If you use idiosyncratic language, then you use language that is very unique to you. And we all have our own idiosyncrasies. And this is one of Thaddeus Sholto's. He uses words that are kind of posh, I think would be a good word of saying it. Complex vocabulary. He uses words that only someone that had read a lot would be able to use. And now here's another nice juxtaposition. That he describes his flat as an oasis of art in the howling desert of South London. So, an oasis, a place that offers travellers in deserts respite and refuge and protection and water and all the things that they need. So this shows that Thaddeus Sholto feels that his flat is essential to him. He needs it to survive. He needs to be surrounded by this art to survive. But then the juxtaposing metaphor that he sees South London as a howling desert. He believes that there is nothing of culture within South London. There is nothing of beauty within South London. And this leads us nicely onto the idea that Thaddeus Sholto, I wrote it sideways here, but you could just read that. Thaddeus Sholto is an aesthetic. Now, an aesthetic is somebody who loves art and beauty and nature and all of these things. Thaddeus Sholto, very, very, very much that kind of person. And I think in here lies another nice juxtaposition. Thaddeus Sholto loves art, he loves beauty, but he himself is not beautiful. So there again is a duality of physical appearance that is not to be desired, wanting to surround himself with things that are to be desired, a physical appearance that is not to be desired, but actually characteristics that are very desirable. Thaddeus Sholto is a nice guy, as we're going to find out. Okay, so then we get a description of the house and another juxtaposition. In that sorry house, it looked as out of place as a diamond of the first water in a setting of brass. This is an important quotation. If Thaddeus Sholto comes up, this is a nice juxtaposition to talk about. So, a diamond of the first water would be the best diamond. The best diamond. A setting of brass is the worst metal. So what Watson is saying here is that in this neighbourhood, in this area of London, this room was so unique and so full of value that it was out of place because it was in an area that wasn't unique and didn't have any value. So, I think that this talks a little bit about class and Watson appreciated things of an upper class more than things of a lower class. We then get, the richest and glossiest, so the use of superlatives here, which shows something of the amount of wealth and the amount of taste that Thaddeus Sholto had. Okay, so let's move on. So the richest and glossiest of curtains and tapestries draped the walls, looped back here and there to expose some richly mounted painting or oriental vase. The carpet was of amber and black, so soft and so thick that the foot sank pleasantly into it, as into a bed of moss. 2 great tiger skins thrown athwart it increased the suggestion of Eastern luxury, as did a huge hookah which stood upon a mat in the corner. A lamp in the fashion of a silver dove was hung from an almost invisible golden wire in the centre of the room. As it burned, it filled the air with a subtle and aromatic odour. "Mr. Thaddeus Sholto," said the little man, still jerking and smiling. "That is my name. You are Miss Morstan, of course. And these gentlemen? This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes, and this is Dr. Watson." "A doctor, eh?" cried he, much excited. "Have you your stethoscope? Might I ask you, would you have the kindness? I have grave doubts as to my mitral valve. If you would be so very good, the aortic I may rely upon, but I should value your opinion upon the mitral." I listened to his heart as requested, but was unable to find anything amiss, save indeed that he was in an ecstasy of fear, for he shivered from head to foot. "It appears to me to be normal," I said. "You have no cause for uneasiness." "You will excuse my anxiety, Miss Morstan," he remarked airily. I am a great sufferer, and I've long had suspicions as to that valve. I'm delighted to hear that they are unwarranted. Had your father, Miss Morstan, refrained from throwing a strain upon his heart, he might have been alive now. Now we're going to stop there because I want to read the next paragraph just before the next page. So just to make a quick note that here we have exactly what I was talking about on the last page. An aesthetic, they are people who appreciate beauty, art and nature. So, here's a little question you could answer. How is Sholto an aesthetic? You do this in your books. I think that's an important question to answer because it's so much of Sholto's character to the point where he's actually a little bit disconnected from the real world. So we get more description of Thaddeus Sholto's room, richly mounted paintings. The repetition of the word rich here talks about wealth, class, oriental vase, amber, black, thick, soft carpets. Now, within this description, we are given something of Thaddeus Sholto's colonialist attitude. He is interested in things of beauty, but most interested in things of beauty from the colonies. So the oriental vase from China, the 2 great tiger skins, this would be treasure from a foreign land, definitely. These tigers would have been hunted in India or Asia and skinned, and he's had those skins, it's kind of a symbol of domination that the white British people have taken these things from the East. And indeed, the reference to Eastern luxury shows that Thaddeus Sholto is very much interested in art and beautiful things from other countries. Now here we have another little piece of symbolism. I think the lamp in the fashion of a silver dove. So doves, they represent peace. This could foreshadow that where they've come into is a peaceful environment, that they're going to get peace from Thaddeus Sholto. He's not a villain. He's not going to treat them bad. And then, so we get more about Thaddeus Sholto. We see him as a hypochondriac. He says here, I am a great sufferer. And indeed, he is very interested in Dr. Watson having a look at his heart, saying here, I have grave doubts as to my mitral valve. This nice metaphor, this is kind of a bit of a pun. If you say you have grave doubts, that grave could link to the idea that you think you're going to die, that you think you're going to end up in a grave. So this also shows that Thaddeus believes himself to be weak. He considers himself to have ill health, and we see here again weakness, that he shivered from head to foot, that he spoke airily as someone who has no strength. And now this is nice, but kind of like a foreshadowing for the whole story. Remember that they're here to find out what happened to Mary Morstan's father, and we find out categorically now that Mary Morstan's father is indeed dead. And this all links to what we will see in Major Sholto's narrative. So here's another clue, making a note that here we see that Miss Morstan's father is dead. Okay, let's continue. So starting down here. I could have struck the man across the face, so hot was I at this callous and offhand reference to so delicate a matter. Miss Morstan sat down, and her face grew white to the lips. Let's just really quickly deal with this, actually. Let's quickly deal with this. This is showing that Watson's feelings for Mary are strong, and he wants to defend her. He doesn't appreciate how Thaddeus Sholto has just informed Mary Morstan that her father is dead. He does it in quite a flippant way. Ironically, in kind of the similar way that Sherlock Holmes would have done. And I think this shows some of Watson's bias here. So we see Watson is intolerant of Sholto's emotional coldness, but ignores Holmes's. He ignores Holmes's emotional coldness. He calls him an automaton, and he does all of this stuff in chapter 1, but he kind of lets Holmes off from that. And it may be because they've spent a lot of time together, because they are friends, but there is a certain amount of hypocrisy here. But please note that Watson doesn't strike him across the face. He lets him continue. He's a refined Victorian gentleman after all. So, I knew in my heart that he was dead. What's going on here? Said Mary. Ooh. Sorry, said she. I can give you every information, said he, and what is more, I can do you justice. And I will, too, whatever Brother Bartholomew may say. I am so glad to have your friends here, not only as an escort to you, but also as witnesses to what I am about to do and say. The three of us can show a bold front to Brother Bartholomew, but let us have no outsiders, no police or officials. We can settle everything satisfactorily among ourselves without any interference. Nothing would annoy Brother Bartholomew more than any publicity. He sat down upon a low settee and blinked at us inquiringly with his weak, watery blue eyes. For my part, said Holmes, whatever you may choose to say will go no further. I nodded to show my agreement. That is well, said he. May I offer you a glass of Chianti, Miss Morstan, or of Tokay? I keep no other wines. Shall I open a flask? No? Well, then I trust that you have no objection to tobacco smoke, to the mild balsamic odour of the Eastern tobacco. I am a little nervous, and I find my hookah an invaluable sedative. He applied a taper to the great bowl, and the smoke bubbled merrily through the rose water. We sat, all three, in a semicircle, with our heads advanced, and our chins upon our hands, while the strange, jerky little fellow, with his high, shining head, puffed uneasily in the centre. When I first determined to make this communication to you, he said, I might have given you my address, but I feared that you might disregard my request and bring unpleasant people with you. I took the liberty, therefore, of making an appointment in such a way that my man Williams might be able to see you first. Okay, let's stop. Now for this, I want you to think a little bit about why doesn't Thaddeus want the police to be involved? You know, as this story unfolds from here on in, why is Thaddeus Sholto so against the police being involved? Right, just keep that in your minds. So here he starts with this, a repetition of what he said in his note. I can do you justice. Extending the idea that Mary Morstan has been wronged somehow, further developing the idea that there are different types of justice. Please remember these types of justice: financial justice, legal justice, and social justice. Thaddeus Sholto believes that he can give Mary Morstan maybe not the legal justice, but definitely the social and the financial justice. Okay. We also get the introduction of the character of Brother Bartholomew, who we will see later on a little bit. Now here, when he says that he is looking for witnesses to what he's about to do and say, this talks about legal matters, and I think that this is definitely using the vocabulary of law, where a witness would be someone who is there to say that something is truthful or that something actually did happen. But this also works as a nice introduction to his narrative. Now here we see off second, really. Oh, I'm sorry. Just to add this, you know that I love looking at irony. You know that I love looking at puns. Here where he says, we can show a bold front to Brother Bartholomew. You might not include this in your exams, but it's just a nice piece of irony. And a nice homophone as well. Bold and bold, Yeah, I think this is just Conan Doyle including a little joke. But also, it means to stand up to Brother Bartholomew. Now going on to this, no outsiders, no police or officials. This shows that Thaddeus Sholto has a mistrust of the police, which will be explained later in this chapter. But this is where it is established, that Thaddeus Sholto does not trust the police, in the same way that the Victorian public did not trust the police. Okay. Another little description of him, his weak, watery blue eyes. So illness, sadness, weakness, all of that kind of stuff. Holmes remains confidential. Here we have drinking. We'll talk more about drinking alcohol in a little bit. The overall idea of the use of substances, particularly between the classes, but we'll get onto that when we get to see some more working class drinking. Further symbols of colonialism from the Orient, so Eastern tobacco, hookah pipe. I'm also noting here more of those idiosyncratic words that he would use, the idiosyncratic vocabulary, the invaluable sedative, the balsamic odour, Chianti, Tokay. This also, this idiosyncratic vocabulary talks of class and the upper class. If he's been raised in boarding schools and establishments such as Eton and Oxford and gone to university, then he's going to use a higher level vocabulary than, say, the lower or the middle classes. Now, here we have a nice little sum up for Thaddeus Sholto, the strange, jerky little fellow with his high, shining head puffed uneasily in the centre. So, strange, jerky fellow, high, shining head, puffing on his hookah. That's Thaddeus Sholto. Okay. So, we get a little explanation of the mystery of the pot as well. So let's continue. I have complete confidence in his discretion, and he had orders. If he were dissatisfied, to proceed no further in the matter. You will excuse these precautions, but I am a man of somewhat retiring, and I might even say refined tastes, and there is nothing more unaesthetic than a policeman. I have a natural shrinking from all forms of rough materialism. I seldom come into contact with the rough crowd. I live, as you see, with some little atmosphere of elegance around me. I may call myself a patron of the arts. It is my weakness. The landscape is a genuine Corot, and though a connoisseur might perhaps throw a doubt upon the Salvator Rosa, there cannot be the least question about the Bouguereau. I am particular in the modern French school. You will excuse me, Mr. Sholto, said Miss Morstan, but I am here at your request to learn something which you desire to tell me. It is very late, and I should desire the interview to be as short as possible. At the best it must take some time, he answered, for we shall certainly have to go to Norwood and see Brother Bartholomew. We shall all go and try if we can get the better of Brother Bartholomew. He is very angry with me for taking the course which has seemed right to me. I had quite high words with him last night. You cannot imagine what a terrible fellow he is when he is angry. If we were to go to Norwood, it would perhaps be as well to start at once, I ventured to remark. He laughed until his ears were quite red. That would hardly do, he cried. I don't know what he would say if I brought you in that sudden way. No, I must prepare you by showing you how we all stand to each other. In the first place, I must tell you that there are several points in the story of which I am myself ignorant. I can only lay the facts before you as far as I know them myself. So again, we're looking at how Thaddeus Sholto is presented in this character. And one little activity that I think would be really useful once you've done this annotation is to make a list and split evidence into the physical descriptions of Thaddeus and the emotional descriptions of Thaddeus. Okay. Here then we get more descriptions of Thaddeus Sholto. He describes himself as retiring, as having refined tastes. This means that he has experienced so many things now that he can really spot the best of things, and that he really enjoys the best of things, whether it be food or art or wine or culture in general. He really only likes the best, which again, that's class. Now here's a really a nice little description. There is nothing more unaesthetic than a policeman. So this is Thaddeus Sholto calling the police ugly. And we could apply this to the police that we see later in this novel. Athelney Jones is not the most refined or aesthetically pleasing person, but the fact that he's saying that there is nothing more unaesthetic than a policeman, that shows that he really doesn't hold them in very high regard. For someone who believes so much in beauty and culture, to describe a policeman as unaesthetic, that shows that he really is not a fan. And he talks about them as having rough materialism. So rough materialism, I mean, this could again talk about things like uniforms, things like consumerism, all of that stuff that maybe is linked in with the police force, who at this time were mostly working for money. It wasn't so much of a love of the job. He talks about his flat has some little atmosphere of elegance, so again, aesthetic, that he's a patron of the arts, that he's willing to spend money on paintings. And here we are given 3 painters' names. Now, these are real painters, the Corot, the Salvator Rosa. With that Salvator Rosa, he did a painting with 4 soldiers in it. I don't know whether there's much symbolism regarding that, but it's interesting. If you want, have a look at some Salvatore Rosa paintings and try and find that 4 soldiers painting, because that could relate to the Sign of the Foreigner Way. And finally, Bouguereau, who was a very popular painter at that time. But all of this combined just shows that Thaddeus Sholto is a lover of the arts. Now here, Mary Morstan, she does not care about the arts. She's not here to talk about art or aesthetics or any of that kind of stuff. She's there to find out things about her father. And we're introduced a little bit more to Brother Bartholomew, Thaddeus Sholto's brother. He's an angry character. And he's a terrible fellow when he is angry. I don't get the impression that Thaddeus Sholto gets angry. So maybe we could look at duality within family here. In particular, we saw this already with Watson. His brother was a bit of a drunk, didn't really take care of himself, and kind of passed away because of it. Watson, on the other hand, very meticulous. He's a doctor, not necessarily a drunk, looks after himself. Here we have another duality within this family. Brother Bartholomew is this angry, as we will see later on, greedy character, whereas Thaddeus Sholto, more of a calm, refined character. And if he's willing to spend all this money on the arts, then I'm not really sure that we could describe him as greedy. Okay. So where he says here, I must prepare you, that means to inform of the details. And now we get our strongest piece of evidence that we're dealing with some unreliable narrators. Where Thaddeus Sholto says there are several points in the story of which I am myself ignorant, he sets himself up as an unreliable narrator. He's showing here he doesn't know all of the details of the story. He wasn't there when his father was doing all the things that he talks about. He wasn't there when Captain Morstan died. He wasn't there in the colonies either. He is reporting second-hand information. And then we can apply that to Watson, who is reporting second-hand information through a second-hand source. And just note, so here's maybe the definition of an unreliable narrator. Let's continue. So just note here at the beginning, this is the beginning of Thaddeus Sholto's narrative, and it's a flashback. So we're moving from the present into the past now. So, my father, as you may have guessed, Major John Sholto, once of the Indian Army. He retired some 11 years ago and came to live at Pondicherry Lodge in Upper Norwood. He had prospered in India and brought back with him a considerable sum of money, a large collection of valuable curiosities, and a staff of native servants. With these advantages he bought himself a house and lived in great luxury. My twin brother Bartholomew and I were the only children. I very well remember the sensation which was caused by the disappearance of Captain Morstan. We read the details in the papers, and, knowing that he had been a friend of our father's, we discussed the case freely in his presence. He used to join in our speculations as to what could have happened. Never, for an instant, did we suspect that he had the whole secret hidden in his own breast, that of all men he alone knew the fate of Arthur Morstan. We did know, however, that some mystery, some positive danger, overhung our father. He was very fearful of going out alone, and he always employed 2 prize fighters to act as porters at Pondicherry Lodge. Williams, who drove you here tonight, was one of them. He was once lightweight champion of England. Our father would never tell us what it was he feared, but he had a most marked aversion to men with wooden legs. On one occasion he actually fired his revolver at a wooden-legged man, who proved to be a harmless tradesman canvassing for orders. We had to pay a large sum to hush the matter up. My brother and I used to think this a mere whim of my father's, but events have since led us to change our opinion. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So now we're given some information about this Major John Sholto. The Pinks, just to make a note, the Pinks, they are going to be Major Sholto from here on in. So we're given some information. We know that he was a major, so he's a higher rank than a captain. This is military ideas. This also links with colonial ideas. The people that were over there keeping indigenous populations under control were military people. Served in the Indian Army. So again, we are dealing with colonialism. He had prospered in India and brought back with him a considerable sum of money. So he made money from stealing from indigenous people. So he made money from stealing from Indians. This was the case a lot with colonialism. And in fact, this is the case with the actual treasure in this story. It's a treasure that has been stolen from Indian people. Okay. The staff of native servants, so this is colonialism. Certainly, I would say a staff of native servants, you're probably looking more at slaves rather than traditional servants. I'm not exactly sure they would have been paid. I'm not exactly sure they would have been allowed out wandering around London on their own with their spare time. Not sure they would have had very much spare time at all. So, kind of a form of slavery here. But we must remember that when this novel was written, slavery was over. Officially, but not unofficially. We find out that Bartholomew is a twin brother, so we know that he's going to look the same as Thaddeus Sholto. This is a key clue for something else that happens in the story. He describes the news of his of Captain Morson's disappearance as a sensation, making it look like a public scandal, that sort of thing. Now here we see Major Sholto lying. These are full-on lies, and he's being incredibly deceptive. So they're talking about the disappearance of Captain Morstan, and he's already said to Mary Morstan that he didn't see Captain Morstan. He doesn't know where he is. But here, he also used to join in our speculations as to what could have happened. Well, you know, Major Sholto knows, as we'll find out soon enough. And I want to start thinking about why. Why does Major Sholto lie? There are a couple of reasons, none of them good, some more extreme than others. We'll talk about them when we get there. And this, he had the whole secret hidden in his own breast. This is a nice metaphor to show that he held the secret in his heart. It could also mean that, you know, he was keeping it close to his chest. As if you confess something, you get something off of your chest. He was keeping it on his chest. So yeah. So we now get some details around Major Sholto and Major Sholto's fears. He has a worry about men with wooden legs. This is a little foreshadowing for Jonathan Sholto, another character in this novel who has a wooden leg. The fact that he uses prize fighters for protection. He's incredibly paranoid, incredibly fearful. This metaphor that some mystery, some positive danger overhung our father. The idea that this danger and mystery was always with him, that he couldn't go anywhere without worrying about this. But these are all described as events, and that leads to the mystery because we aren't given too many details yet. Okay. So let's continue. Early in 1882, my father received a letter from India, which was a great shock to him. He nearly fainted at the breakfast table when he opened it, and from that day he sickened to his death. What was in that letter we could never discover, but I could see as he held it that it was short and written in a scrawling hand. He had suffered for years with an enlarged spleen, but he now became rapidly worse, and towards the end of April we were informed that he was beyond all hope, and that he wished to make a last communication to us. When we entered his room, he was propped up with pillows and breathing heavily. He besought us to lock the door and to come upon either side of the bed. Then, grasping our hands, he made a remarkable statement to us in a voice which was broken as much by emotion as by pain. I shall try and give it to you in his very own words. I will stop there because that's where we got introduced to Thaddeus Sholto's father's narrative, Major Sholto's narrative. But we're now dealing with the decline of Major Sholto. This is his later life. So when he got this letter, highly affected, he fainted at the breakfast table. He sickened to his death. Another metaphor to describe Major Sholto and his passing. You know that he never gets better from here. Okay. Just a side note. Thaddeus Sholto notes that the paper was written in a scrawling hand, so the handwriting was not neat. Bear in mind, we've already seen Holmes discussing handwriting, but this talks of potentially the person that wrote the note was from the lower classes, that it was someone that wasn't as educated or had spent as much time writing as other people. And again, this foreshadows Jonathan Small. You know, Jonathan Small is a working class guy. We're going to see a lot of details about Jonathan Small before we actually meet him in chapter 12. But here are some of them. When we entered his room, it propped up, so he asked us to lock the door and to come up on either side. He wants privacy. He doesn't want any others to know what he's about to say, because essentially he is making a pretty big confession on his deathbed here. However, Thaddeus Sholto talks about how his voice was broken as much by emotion as by pain. Now, I think this must be Thaddeus's own bias. The details we're about to learn about Major Sholto, I don't feel he's a very emotional character. I feel here he is sad because he knows he's going to die. He's sad because he knows he's got to reveal this pretty horrible detail about his past. I'm not sure that he is that hurt by what he's about to say, by what actually happened, just because of the things that he does and the way that he lives his life. Okay, so this is now Thaddeus Sholto's father's narrative. This is the second narrative shift. We've gone from Watson to Thaddeus to Major Sholto. So this is now all told from Major Sholto's perspective. Okay, but remembering that it is all remembered through Thaddeus Sholto, told to Watson. So we have to take some of the details with a pinch of salt. Okay. I've only one thing, he said, which weighs upon my mind at this supreme moment. It is my treatment of poor Morstan's orphan. The cursed greed which has been my besetting sin through life has withheld from her the treasure, half at least of which should have been hers. And yet I have made no use of it myself. So blind and foolish a thing is avarice. The mere feeling of possession has been so dear to me that I could not bear to share it with another. See that chaplet dipped with pearls beside the quinine bottle. Even that I could not bear to part with, although I had got it out with the design of sending it to her. You, my sons, will give her a fair share of the agro treasure, but send her nothing, not even the chaplet, until I am gone. After all, men have been as bad as this, and have recovered. I will tell you how Morstan died, he continued. He had suffered for years from a weak heart, but he concealed it from everyone. I alone knew it. When in India, he and I, through a remarkable chain of circumstances, came into possession of a considerable treasure. I brought it over to England, and on the night of Morstan's arrival, he came straight over here to claim his share. He walked over from the station and was admitted by my faithful Lal Chowder, who is now dead. Morstan and I had a difference of opinion as to the division of the treasure, and we came to heated words. Morstan had sprung out of his chair in a paroxysm of anger, when he suddenly pressed his hand to his side. His face turned a dusky hue, and he fell backwards, cutting his head against the corner of the treasure chest. When I stopped over him, I found to my horror that he was dead. For a long time I sat half distracted, wondering what I should do. My first impulse was, of course, to call for assistance, but I could not but recognise that there was every chance that I would be accused of his murder. His death at the moment of a quarrel, and the gash in his head, would be black against me. Again, an official inquiry could not be made without bringing up some facts about the treasure, which I was particularly anxious to keep secret. He had told me that no soul upon earth knew where he had gone. There seemed to be no necessity why any soul ever should know. I was still pondering over the matter, when looking up, I saw my servant Lal Chowder in the doorway. He stole in and bolted the door behind him. Do not fear, Sahib, he said. No one need know that you have killed him. Let us hide away, and who is the wiser? Let us hide him away, and who is the wiser? I did not kill him, said I. Lal Chowder shook his head and smiled. I heard it all, Sahib, said he. I heard you quarrel, and I heard the blow, but my lips are sealed. All are asleep in the house. Let us put him away together. That was enough to decide me. Okay, we'll stop there. That's quite long. So this is Major Sholto's flashback now. This is the incident where he meets Captain Morstan and Captain Morstan dies. Now, we get a little bit of description about Major Sholto and his own attitude and personality. He talks about there being one thing which weighs upon my mind. So these thoughts, he's thinking about them a lot. They trouble him. They are heavy and keeping him down. He recognises the cursed greed, this metaphor, talking about how his desire to own things, his desire for materialism, ironically, the rough materialism that maybe Thaddeus is talking about. So maybe indicating that Thaddeus and his father didn't massively see eye to eye. But the cursed greed, he sees this as sin. So we've got the religious connotations around that. He knows it's wrong. He is cursed with it, he feels. The treasure, half of least, which should have been hers. So Mary has been owed this money. Here we are revealed with the financial justice that Thaddeus Sholto talks about, or implies when he talks about justice. Thaddeus Sholto knows that the money is there. He's known for some years that the money is there, but hasn't been getting to Mary. So that's financial justice. The idea of greed, the hollowness of wealth, backed up with the idea that he's made no use of it himself, that he hasn't used the money. Now again, I'm not sure whether this is true or not. Later on in the novel, when he runs out from Captain Morstan, he uses the excuse that he's inherited money from a family member. But Thaddeus Sholto doesn't talk about him inheriting money from a family member. He talks about him bringing money back from India, bringing riches back from India. And this is a strange situation where the beginning of the novel and the end of the novel don't match up. I think Sholto is lying here. I think he is lying. Okay. The word avarice, that's another word for greed. I like that word. It's a good word. Now here, we are given a callback to the pearls that Mary Morstan received. The chaplet dipped with beads. With pearls. These are the pearls that Mary Morstan's been receiving. Now, we see that at no point as well, Major Sholto had no design. Oh, sorry, that he wanted to give it to her, but his greed took over. And even in death, he says, send her nothing, not even the chaplet until I'm gone. After all, men have been as bad as this and have recovered. This shows him greedy in death. This also is a little bit of dramatic irony. We know that he's dead. We know that he died. He doesn't know that he's died. Oh, sorry. He doesn't know that he's going to die. So we're given a little bit of dramatic irony. Now this, again, this for me doesn't necessarily ring of the truth. So the fact that Captain Morstan had suffered from years from a weak heart but concealed it from everyone except from Sholto. It seems like quite a convenient secret for Major Sholto to have Captain Morstan have a heart condition that he dies of in his house that nobody can verify apart from Major Sholto. I'm not sure in life that would stand up in court. Which again, that may explain why Thaddeus Sholto is so worried about the police being involved. Okay, let's continue with this annotation. Okay. A little bit, as we get to it, let's compare that to Jonathan Small. Jonathan Small works evenly all the way through. The treasure will be split 4 ways between the sign of 4. There is honour within that. Here, we see Morstan and Sholto arguing about how the treasure should be divided. Again, think about what this says about class. People from the working class willing to share things fairly. People from the upper class arguing about how things should be shared. These little references, these little points of contact between the major themes and the major context, you need to be aware of them all the time. I'll get onto this in a second, all of that. But here is the death of Captain Morstan. He has a heart attack and falls, cutting his head against the corner of the treasure chest. Now this could be one of 3 things. This could show that the treasure is cursed in kind of the supernatural way, and that anyone that deals with the treasure is only going to come into bad luck. Certainly you could follow the fortunes of the people we see in this novel, and none of them have very much luck with the treasure. Even Mary Morstan at the end doesn't have very much luck with the treasure. It could also be murder, maybe, and me and Miss Aldis have a little bit of a differing opinion on here, but maybe Thaddeus Sholto struck Captain Morstan over the back of the head with a blunt object, killing him, causing the cut, and he's trying to explain it through the treasure chest stuff. It could also have been just the heart attack. You know, he could be telling the truth here. He could be telling the truth. So he says that afterwards he sat half distracted, wondering what he should do. This isn't necessarily the behaviour of someone who's just seen their friend have a heart attack. You might try to revive him, you might try to sort something out, but he doesn't. He just sits there waiting. And again, he recognises that he's probably going to be accused of this murder. The situation looks highly suspicious, backing up once more the idea that Major Sholto maybe not the most reliable of narrators. Now. And finally, just to round this little bit off, this metaphor, the idea that the details of Captain Morstan's death would be black against me, could be used as evidence against him. This is what he's worried about. The use of the colour black, that could again indicate that it might lead to his own execution. Black is a colour associated with death. So this was a time when people were hung for murder. Major Sholto may be very worried that he's going to be accused of murder and be found guilty. Now the idea that an official inquiry could not be made without bringing out some facts. He's talking here about Jonathan Small's story. Now, all the way through this, he doesn't mention Jonathan Small, he doesn't mention the person that they stole the treasure from in the first place. Nothing. He talks about the wooden-legged men. That's Jonathan Small. He's worried about the wooden-legged men. That's clearly he's worried about Jonathan Small. We could put two and two together and assume the letter that he received is from Jonathan Small. So Jonathan Small is obviously back in England, ready to hunt him down. But he at no point mentions Jonathan Small. Now in your books, I want you to think about that. Why did Sholto not say anything about Jonathan Small in the Sign of Four? Why? How does it serve his narrative? How does it make him seem like a good guy still, to some degree, that he doesn't talk about Jonathan Small? And it's going to be difficult until we get to the end of the novel. We'll maybe revisit that question. Now, we see Major Sholto's servant trying to enter into some sort of conspiracy with him. Lal Chowder, he believes that Major Sholto has murdered Jonathan Small. He thinks that he did it, from what he heard. This shows that he is loyal, that he's willing to cover for his master/employer. However, think again. Why does Sholto reveal this? Why does Sholto talk about this, Lal Chowder, offering to help him dispose of the body, but not the Jonathan Small stuff? Is this Major Sholto giving details to try and make it seem slightly believable, but concealing the actual truth? At the end of the day, I have a big bee in my bonnet that actually, Major Sholto murdered Captain Morstan. But, we can talk more about that later on. However, either Sholto knew but didn't tell Mary Morstan, which in itself was a terrible thing. Either Captain Morstan did die of a heart attack and Major Sholto just didn't tell Mary Morstan because he didn't want to share the treasure. That's pretty awful. Or he killed Captain Morstan and then didn't tell Mary Morstan. Either way, this is a guilty person. This is someone who has done something wrong. Okay. Let's move on. So, if my own servant could not believe my innocence, how could I hope to make it good before 12 foolish tradesmen in a jury box? Lal Chowder and I disposed of the body that night. Within a few days, the London papers were full of the mysterious disappearance of Captain Morstan. You will see from what I say that I can hardly be blamed in the matter. My fault lies in the fact that we concealed not only the body, but also the treasure, and that I have clung to Morstan's share as well as to my own. I wish you, therefore, to make restitution. Put your ears down to my mouth. The treasure is hidden in... At this instant, a horrible change came over his expression. His eyes stared wildly, his jaw dropped, and he yelled in a voice which I can never forget, "Keep him out! For Christ's sake, keep him out!" We both stared round at the window behind us, upon which his gaze was fixed. A face was looking in at us out of the darkness. We could see the whiteness of the nose where it was pressed against the glass. It was a bearded, hairy face with wild, cruel eyes and an expression of concentrated malevolence. My brother and I rushed towards the window, but the man was gone. When we returned to my father, his head had drooped and his pulse had ceased to beat. We searched the garden that night, but found no sign of the intruder, save that just under the window a single footmark was visible in the flower bed. But for that one trace, we might have thought that our imaginations had conjured up that wild, fierce face. We soon, however, had another and more striking proof that there were secret agencies at work all round us. The window of my father's room was found open in the morning. His cupboards and boxes had been rifled, and upon his chest was fixed a torn piece of paper with the words, "The sign of 4," scrawled across it. Okay. So, just to finish up Major Sholto's narrative, this reference to 12 foolish tradesmen in the jury box. He knows that he can't convince a jury in a case that this isn't murder. He understands that this looks like murder, and maybe this is why he's keeping the secrets. Maybe this is why he doesn't want to tell Mary Morstan, because he's worried that she might accuse him of murder. But this 12 foolish tradesmen in a jury box, this is a reference to the patriarchy. Now, we've covered the patriarchy in our critical theory work when we're looking at the Crucible. You guys should understand what the patriarchy is. Now, understand that in Victorian society, only male landowners could be members of the jury. So women, not allowed to be members of the jury. Any working class men, not allowed to be members of the jury. It was reserved for people of a certain station. And I think that this shows that Major Sholto, even though he is a part of the patriarchy, understands that it isn't that effective, that it doesn't quite work, because he doesn't believe that 12 foolish tradesmen are able to hand out any kind of correct, responsible justice. Again, he tries to clarify himself as not an unreliable narrator, but by doing so, I think he just lays it on quite thick and makes him seem even more unreliable. That he says, you will see from what I say that I can hardly be blamed in the matter. He's trying to give himself an out. He's trying to, convince them too much that he's not involved with any kind of shady dealings. We see more that he has clung to Morstan's share. This is a desperate action. A clung is a desperate verb, linking again to greed. But he's kind of explaining his change of heart. He does want to give her something, some restitution. Now, suspense is generated here. This is a lovely piece of punctuation. This dash, the literally Major Sholto is about to give them the location of the treasure when he sees someone at the window. He stops telling them. They aren't going to know where the treasure is, because when they come back, he's dead. We see fear here. He's scared if whoever's at the window. And now we get our first description of Jonathan Small. A face looking in at us out of the darkness. We can see the whitening of the nose. Noting here, light dark imagery. The first physical description of Jonathan Small, and we are given light dark imagery. Same kind of light dark imagery for Holmes, the same type of light dark imagery for Mary Morstan. This foreshadows him being a complex character, him having good elements and bad elements, as we all do, and I hope that by the end of the novel you can sympathise a little with Jonathan Small, because he is a good man put into some terrible situations, who makes some terrible choices. Okay. But here is the first description. He is bearded, hairy, animal-like, with wild, cruel eyes. Again, wild, some kind of animal imagery. And an expression of concentrated malevolence. So hate for the person that he's looking at. Concentrated hate. But when they come back, Major Sholto is dead. And you would think that it would be some small comfort to Jonathan Small that he was there when Major Sholto died. But as we'll see, that's not necessarily the case. Now, we're given sort of the descriptions of them searching. We're given lots and lots of clues. A single footmark visible in the flower bed. Why might there only be one footmark in the flower bed? Well, if you've only got one leg, then you can only produce one footmark. So that ties nicely with the fear of the one-legged man, and this person who's come to visit is the one-legged man. Therefore, it must be Jonathan Small. Again, more animal imagery, or at least more sort of primal imagery. The wild, fierce face, use of fricatives within that fierce face, heat, that there is some sort of fire within there. And the secret agents is at work all around us, that there is some mystery, that he believes that there are people in the background, people in the shadows, who are trying to manipulate them and trying to control their lives. And we get another reference to the sign of 4, which is Jonathan Small's calling card. Wherever we see the sign of 4, Jonathan Small's been there. Let's just try and get this on. Oh, what's happening here? Bear with me, guys. Sorry about this. Just let me go and select it properly from the thing. Page. I believe this should be the correct page. Sorry about this. Sorry about this. Sorry about this. Okay. So, here we go. What the phrase meant, or who our secret visitor may have been, we never knew. As far as we could judge, none of my father's property had been actually stolen, though everything had been turned out. My brother and I naturally associated this peculiar incident with the fear which haunted my father during his life, but it is still a complete mystery to us. The little man stopped to relight his hookah, and puffed thoughtfully for a few moments. We'd all sat absorbed, listening to his extraordinary narrative. At the short account of her father's death, Miss Morstan had turned deadly white, and for a moment I feared that she was about to faint. She rallied, however, on drinking a glass of water, which I quietly poured out for her from a Venetian carafe upon the side table. Sherlock Holmes leaned back in his chair with an abstracted expression, and the lids drawn low over his glittering eyes. As I glanced at him, I could not but think how on that very day he had complained bitterly of the commonplaceness of life. Here, at least, was a problem which would tax his sagacity to the utmost. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto looked from one to the other of us with an obvious pride at the effect which his story had produced, and then continued between the puffs of his overgrown pipe. Okay, we'll stop there. Let's just quickly do these. To note, sorry I didn't mention this, we're dealing here with a return to Thaddeus's narrative. So we go from Major Sholto back to Thaddeus, and then on the next page we go back to Watson's narrative. We see, so we assume that this Jonathan Small character, this Wrongan, the villain of the story, the guy of the sign of 4, he's broken in to this really rich, massive house, but not stolen anything. So this talks about there being some honour within the character of Jonathan Small. He broke in to leave the sign of 4 note. He didn't break in to steal any of their possessions. Now we see that Watson considers Thaddeus's story to be a strange story. You know, he sees the mystery within it. We get a little bit about Mary Morstan, that she has shown some emotion here. She turned a deadly white, and Watson for a moment feared she was about to faint, but she recovered after drinking a glass of water. So again, this is Mary Morstan as a typical Victorian woman holding onto her emotions, retaining her sense of composure. We may as well just move on. So Watson thinks that Holmes will find the case difficult and that he will really enjoy it. Again, this links with Holmes's black moods, his depression at the beginning of the story, and his desire for an interesting case. Right, now we once again return to Thaddeus's narrative. We nearly finished here, we've only got a couple of pages left. Let's just buckle in, get this chapter done. Okay, so my brother and I, he said, were, as you imagine, much excited as to the treasure which my father had spoken of. For weeks and for months we dug and delved in every part of the garden without discovering its whereabouts. It was maddening to think that the hiding place was on his very lips at the moment that he died. We could judge the splendour of the missing riches by the chaplet which he had taken out. Over this chaplet my brother Bartholomew and I had some little discussion. The pearls were evidently of great value, and he was averse to part with them, for between friends my brother was himself a little inclined to my father's fault. He thought too that if we parted with the chaplet it might give rise to gossip and finally bring us into trouble. It was all that I could do to persuade him to let me find out Miss Morstan's address and send her a detached pearl at fixed intervals, so at least she might never feel destitute. It was a kindly thought, said our companion earnestly. It was extremely good of you. The little man waved his hand deprecatingly. We were your trustees, he said. That was the view which I took of it, though brother Bartholomew could not altogether see it in that light. We had plenty of money ourselves. I desired no more. Besides, it would have been such bad taste to have treated a young lady in so scurvy a fashion. Le mauvais goût mène au crime. The French have a very neat way of putting these things. Our difference of opinion on this subject went so far that I thought it best to set up rooms for myself, so I left Pondicherry Lodge, taking old Kit McGar and Williams with me. Yesterday, however, I learned that an event of extreme importance has occurred. The treasure has been discovered. I instantly communicated with Miss Morstan, and it only remains for us to drive out to Norwood and demand our share. I explained my views last night to brother Bartholomew, so we shall be expected, if not welcome visitors. Mr. Thaddeus Sholto ceased and sat twitching on his luxurious settee. We all remained silent with our thoughts upon the new development which the mysterious business had taken. Holmes was the first to spring to his feet. You have done well, sir, from first to last, said he. It is possible that we may be able to make you some small return by throwing some light upon that which is still dark to you. Okay, I'll stop there. Stop there nicely now. Ooh, okay, here we go. Right, so we see that Bartholomew Sholto is also greedy. Thaddeus Sholto says he's a little inclined to my father's fault. Bartholomew, very much the same as his father, Major Sholto. This again, we talked about duality within their family. This again links with the idea that Thaddeus is kind and Bartholomew is greedy. We even see it here where Thaddeus says, he says, we had plenty of money ourselves. I desired no more. Thaddeus Sholto, somewhat of the black sheep of the family there. We have the call back to the detached pearl at fixed intervals. So this kind of indicates where the pearl is coming from, why the pearl is being sent, all of that kind of stuff. And then we get Mary Morstan's response to this. It was a kindly thought. It was extremely good of you. This idea that Mary is polite and has no more questions, even though they're dealing with the death of her father, even though there is the potential that Major Sholto murdered her father. She's not concerned about that. She just wants to be polite. She wants to be refined and formal and a proper Victorian person. Thaddeus's response, we were your trustees. So this shows that Thaddeus is kind and that Thaddeus wanted to give Mary Morstan the money. And he even makes a little reference here. He talks about if he didn't give her the money, he'd be treating her in so scurvy a fashion. This means to treat her badly, but at the same time, I think that has symbolism around piracy. And hopefully you should know what scurvy is. When pirates and sailors would be on the sea for a very long time, they didn't get any fresh vegetables or fruit, they would get this condition called scurvy. So talking about so scurvy a fashion and using that word from the lexicon or the semantic field of piracy, he talks about, he feels it would be theft to not give her this stuff. Now, pardon my French pronunciation, I'm sure that I wasn't so great. Le mauvais goût mène au crime. This is French for people who act and behave in, bad taste leads to crime. That's French for bad taste leads to crime. This shows that Thaddeus Sholto believes that people who act and behave in bad taste are likely to commit crimes or like people who have committed crimes. So again, this shows a lot, I think, about Thaddeus Sholto's opinion and attitude towards the treasure and the distribution of this treasure. You know, he doesn't want to behave in bad taste by keeping it all, because he believes that would be a crime. Okay, we find out the treasure has been discovered. This is a plot point. This moves it forwards now. The treasure has been discovered, and he wants. Yeah, Thaddeus wants Mary to have her share of the treasure. Now here we get a little bit of description of Holmes, and we're going to be looking at Holmes now, bearing in mind that from this point on we have returned to Watson's narrative. So we've gone from Watson to Thaddeus to Major Sholto to Thaddeus to Watson. We're nearing the end of the chapter. And within Watson's narrative, we now get some descriptions of Holmes. He was the first to spring to his feet. This shows that Holmes is eager to get going. He wants to carry on with the case. Now, this is some symbolism that we will see in the next chapter. Holmes says, it is possible that we may be able to make you some small return. And again, we have a pun, a piece of irony. It's possible that we're able to make you some small return. Well, that's Jonathan Small, isn't it? Holmes is saying here that he's hoping to capture Jonathan Small, trying to be funny. Well, not necessarily that he's trying to be funny. I think this is Conan Doyle using wordplay to amuse his audience. But you know, I like it. But this is the symbolism. By throwing some light upon that which is still dark to you, we're dealing here once more with light, dark imagery, but I think it refers to something different. This is a metaphor to mean that he's going to help to make them aware of things that are unknown. And I want you to consider that Holmes brings light, showing that he is good. We will see this in the next chapter. He literally is the carrier of the light into darkness, which is bad. Now, this good and bad could be referring to lots of different things. It could be that he's going to bring some justice, which is good, to people who are unjust, which are bad. It could be that he's going to bring some knowledge, which is good, into something where people don't know things, which is bad. You know, this light, dark imagery, good, bad, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. You then need to take it to the next step and think about, well, what that is good and what that is bad. Okay. Moving on. Come on, don't let me do it again. Sorry guys, just give me 1 second. Let me just get up the last page or so. 33, 1 second. 2 to go. We're nearly there. Okay. So, but as Miss Mawson remarked just now, it is late, and we had best put the matter through without delay. Our new acquaintance was very deliberately coiled up the tube of his hookah and produced from behind a curtain a very long, befrogged topcoat with astrakhan collar and cuffs. This he buttoned tightly up in spite of the extreme closeness of the night, and finished his attire by putting on a rabbit-skin cap with hanging lappets which covered the ears so that no part of him was visible save his mobile and peaky face. "My health is somewhat fragile," he remarked as he led the way down the passage. "I am compelled to be a valetudinarian." Our cab was awaiting us outside, and our programme was evidently prearranged, for the driver started off at once at a rapid pace. Thaddeus Sholto talked incessantly in a voice which rose high above the rattle of the wheels. "Bartholomew is a clever fellow," said he. "How do you think he found out where the treasure was? He had come to the conclusion that it was somewhere indoors, so he worked out all the cubic space of the house and made measurements everywhere so that not 1 inch should be unaccounted for. Among other things, he found that the height of the building was 74 feet. But in adding together the heights of all the separate rooms and making every allowance for the space between, which he ascertained by borings, he could not bring the total to more than 70 feet. There were 4 feet unaccounted for. These could only be at the top of the building. He knocked a hole, therefore, in the lath and plaster ceiling of the highest room, and there, sure enough, he came upon another little garret above, which had been sealed up and was known to no one. In the centre stood the treasure chest, resting upon 2 rafters." Okay, so really not very much on this to be getting into. Just we see a little description of the clothes that Thaddeus Sholto wears. These are eccentric clothes, a long befrogged topcoat with astrakhan collar and cuffs. The fact that he puts on a rabbit skin cap. We will look at the animal imagery applied to other characters later on, but here he's being linked with the idea of a rabbit. This again is weakness. It also might link with the idea of prey. He is very easily preyed upon. Again, we get this hypochondriac nature further developed. He says his health is somewhat fragile, and this word, a valetudinarian, is a person who is worried about their health. Okay, just make a little note of that. It's a nice word, and again, it links with those idiosyncratic vocabulary choices that Thaddeus Sholto makes throughout this whole chapter. Okay, finally. He lowered it through the hole, and there it lies. He computes the value of the jewels at no less than £500,000 sterling. At the mention of this gigantic sum, we all stared at one another open-eyed. Miss Morstan, could we secure her rights, would change from a needy governess to the richest heiress in England. Surely it was the place of a loyal friend to rejoice at such news, yet I am ashamed to say that selfishness took me by the soul, and that my heart turned as heavy as lead within me. I stammered out some few halting words of congratulation, and then sat downcast, with my head drooped, deaf to the babble of our new acquaintance. He was clearly a confirmed hypochondriac, and I was dreamily conscious that he was pouring forth interminable trains of symptoms and imploring information as to the composition and action of innumerable quack nostrums, some of which he bore about in a leather case in his pocket. I trust that he may not remember any of the answers which I gave him that night. Holmes declares that he overheard me caution him against the great danger of taking more than 2 drops of castor oil, while I recommended strychnine in large doses as a sedative. However that may be, I was certainly relieved when our cab pulled up with a jerk, and the coachman sprang down to open the door. "This, Miss Morstan, is Pondicherry Lodge," said Mr. Thaddeus Sholto, as he handed her out. Okay. Now, as we're going through this last page, let's just think about, why do you think that Watson reacts to Mary's good news in the way that he does? Why does Watson feel depressed by Mary's good news, by the idea of Mary getting the treasure? Okay. Just to start with, £500,000 sterling, so £500,000 in Victorian money, is the equivalent to £64 million today. So she is entitled to £32 million. That is a lot of money. Okay, so just to clarify that, 500,000 in Victorian money is not the same as it would be today. Now here, Watson's talking about Mary Morstan changing her class status, and class is a big issue between Mary and Watson. We need to just really remember here that Victorians did not mix classes. Poor people did not marry rich people. The middle classes did not associate with the working classes. The higher classes did not associate with the middle classes. The view was everybody remains within their class because that's where they should be. If you are a middle class person, that's where you should be. You just stay a middle class person. The idea of social mobility didn't really exist. The idea that a working class person could educate themselves, get a better job, earn more money, become promoted, that didn't really exist. Education wasn't what it is now. So working class people would just be expected to work. You just had to work. Managers had to manage, and people of leisure in the upper classes, they just lounged around, So Watson here is commenting that Mary Morstan is going to go from a needy governess, so lower middle class, to the richest heiress in England, so from lower middle to upper class. Now this upsets Watson. This makes him feel bad. We need to think about why. So he describes selfishness taking him by the soul. Selfishness took me by the soul. This metaphor that Watson starts to think of himself rather than Mary. My heart turned as heavy as lead within me. A simile talking about how he feels let down, or he feels that his heart has sunk. Something that he hoped for, a relationship with Mary, he feels is now something that's not going to happen. We see this again. His head drooped, deaf to the babble of our new acquaintance. Watson very much now depressed by Mary Morstan's news that she's going to become very rich. We get a few little bits about Thaddeus Sholto finally, the fact he's a hypochondriac, a quack nostrum, this is a fake medicine, and Watson once more mixes up his stories because he's not really paying attention. Castor oil is something safe, and Watson warns him about that, whereas strychnine is a poison. And again, strychnine, this is a foreshadowing. We're going to see strychnine or a strychnine-like poison being used later in the novel. So Conan Doyle is just dotting these little references all the way through the novel that all match up once you get to the end. It's kind of an interesting way of creating a mystery by including things early before we even see them. Now finally, I want you to think about how this chapter deals with class. Think a little about how do the upper class people behave in this chapter? How does Major Sholto behave in this chapter? How do lower class people behave in this chapter, such as Lal Chowder, or the infrequent times that we would see Jonathan Small? How has he behaved? And finally, how are Watson's views on class explored? You know, what does it say about Watson's view of class that he feels that if Mary Morstan becomes rich, he can't be with her? And particularly, how does that fit in with Victorian views on class? Okay. Right, guys, that is it. That's chapter 4. That's a long one. I know it's a long one. It's difficult for me as well to maintain concentration for that long, but I do think that these videos are going to be useful in helping you to prepare for this novel. So I hope you all made it with me to the end, and I will start work on chapter 5 as soon as I can. Okay, I hope you guys are all doing well, and take care, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye bye.